cartoons. This is the Tarasev's cartoon version of the meshchanstvo life that comes before the revolution. This old world is full of all kinds of meshchanstvo that needs to be destroyed. Vaudevilles, advertisement, pet canaries, buit, right? But luckily, the revolution comes along and smashes it all. We have lots of scenes of smashing. But then, even better, a spaceship arrives. A spaceship arrives and it picks up all the meshchanstvo, like the ceramic kitties, and it blasts it all into outer space and, gets rid of it. And then after getting, dumping all the meshchanstvo into outer space, it deposits us into a sleek, shiny, meshchanstvo-free city of the future. Today we have our own meshchansky spaces, and they stand opposed to the sleek blonde wood of the airport lounge, the West Elm staged rental apartment, the coffee shop that could be anywhere on Earth, and in fact, the smoothness of the screen itself. So if you think, for example, of Bong Joon-ho's 2019 film Parasite, rich people live in houses where modernity and power appear as sleek, shiny minimalism. As these interiors suggest, meshchanstvo resists the frictionless experience demanded by tech modernity, what one critic calls interchangeability, ceaseless movement, symbolic blankness. And meshchanstvo resists this, I think, because the meshchanske bolota, the sticky swamp, is almost pure fiction. Friction, not fiction, friction. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't try your patience, and I hope that those who want it are able to take a look at the printed text. Thank you so much. I can stop sharing my screen now unless there's a reason to keep going. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anne, for this wonderful talk. I think we all liked it very much.
Well, I hope so. It's a strange topic. It's a little bit deviant. I had occasion to deliver it to a bunch of Marxists last summer, and I think they were confused and somewhat even though I'm Marxist adjacent myself, but this topic is pushing against some grain, I think.
Okay. So do we have any questions from the audience? Questions, comments? All right, let's start. Okay, let's start with Sarah, Olga, and then Daria. Sarah, please.
Hi, sorry, I can never find my little hand. I have a question just when you were at the very beginning. I don't really know how this works, but my understanding was that people who were illegitimate sons of the nobility would be meshchania. So what was Herzen's? I mean, he was a nobleman, right? How did he get to be a nobleman?
That's a good question, and I did look it up, and I think it's because he petitioned somehow legally. Olga might know, actually. I think he got some sort of dispensation to be.
His father petitioned.
Yeah.
But please double check.
Yeah.
When he was very small, I imagine, right? Because he was raised as.
He was totally raised as a nobleman. Yeah.
But I mean, it's interesting why, I mean, that might be part of why he pushed back against it so fervently,
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
And his mother is a Meshchanka, no?
I think so.
I mean, she's a foreigner, but
I mean, in that period, I think that, in his earliest youth, the category would not have, it would be stigmatized in that it was part of the podatne soslovia, but it wouldn't be stigmatized in this sort of like hygienic, icky, spiritual way that it was later. But certainly one would not want to be a meshchanin if one had the option of being a nobleman or a kupiec. Definitely.
Cool. Thank you very much. That was
sure. And another thing that I have been learning, and it was quite striking to me, was it's certainly by the end of the century, various kinds of people, Jews, could even be stuck into the meshchanstvo. And sometimes, people of different nationality, Jews, Armenians, whatever, would be categorized, I think, as their own category, but sometimes they would be stuck into the meshchanstvo. And I'm not exactly sure how those rules evolved. I'm also not at all sure that they were applied consistently. I don't think there was much that was consistent about this category.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I just called on Mina because Mina Magda, because in my screen she's right there in the middle. Hi, Mina.
All right, Mina, go ahead then. No, you just turned off your mic. It was on before that. There you go. Nope.
Maybe we can listen to
Yeah, maybe we can listen to Olga's question and leave you some time to fix that. Olga,
I
please.
lost Olga. Where's Olga? Oh, there she is.
No, Olga's right
Yeah.
underneath you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Anne, for this fabulous talk. I really learned a lot. I enjoyed it. Your approach to meshchanstvo as a cultural construct is fascinating and productive, very productive. One question. Actually, if some non-Russians, like Jews, Armenians, might be seen as belonging to meshchanstvo, what do you think about other non-Russians, like nomads, semi-nomads, who were sometimes presented as an idyllic mode of life? Freedom from the material aspect of life, and this idealization of some subjugated nationalities. We can see that from time to time in writing of both Herzen and Dostoevsky, not only Tolstoy as well, but particularly Herzen and Dostoevsky. So my question, do you think some nationalities like Tatars, Armenians, Jews were implicitly juxtaposed not only to the true Russians who are not meshchane, but also to good colonized people?
Like I think that makes complete sense that they would be opposed, and I think that the nationalities who were liable to be classed as meshchane, I think that they're involved in trade, right? That they're merchants, they're tainted by that trade practice. And if you're one of the inarodцы and you're on, if you have pastures or you roam free or you live in a picturesque, untainted way and you don't have a lot of material possessions, I think you would never be seen as meshchansky. I think that's true. I think you would fall more on the peasant side in sense of being positive.
And in this sense, they might be identified with true Russianness.
Yeah.
Though in a kind of rudimental form.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true because they have this kind of purity and a sort of access to kind of an abstraction. I really think, one thing I'm most interested in about this project is the way that people are thinking about material culture and stuff and objects and trade and also money, right? And how the stigma attached in intelligentsia culture specifically, the stigma attached to some of those categories gets kind of channeled into the idea of meshchanstvo.
Right. It's beautiful how you trace how this construct evolved. Not only the term that you said you are not going to trace all its development, but how the construct evolved.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. And my minor point, it's not a question, precisely about the evolution of this construct. You might want to look at some writers, Liskov, whom both you and I love,
Yeah.
and also some poetry at the turn of this at the Silver Age, like Mikhail Kuzmin, who idealized the small lives and the Meshchansky uyut.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I don't know Kuzmin well enough to know that at all. So that's very helpful. Yeah, the thing is that there are these counter discourses, right? There are definitely counter discourses. It's just they're not dominant, right? And I think that I don't want to participate in making this discourse the only one, right? So yes, that's very helpful.
Maybe they were dominant, but they're just not being canonized, especially
Yes,
by
exactly.
Soviet culture, you know.
Exactly, right? I mean, I think that's the thing is I need to go back and figure out what was actually what actually people were experiencing as sort of dominant aesthetics, because this is and you know our understanding of meshchanstvo is so intensely mediated by the Soviet period. And you know, I had a colleague, a super smart colleague of mine, read it, and Ilya Kligor, and I think he couldn't get past the fact that meshchanstvo is bad. It's just bad, you know. And he knows what I'm doing, but there's like this emotional response. It's like stuff is very, very bad. You know, don't try to redeem it in any way. Now I'm going to let someone else do the calling. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you, Olga. So Mina asked her question in writing. And can you please read it for us?
Do you sense a relationship between the untranslatability of meshchanstvo and the problem of desire and legibility? The stills from Parasite and the Tarasov cartoon and the deliberate inscrutability of the latter's aesthetic versus the clear, clean, legible minimalism in Parasite. Is meshchanstvo in some sense an aesthetic complaint against unreadability? So, okay, wait. The problem, the desire for legibility. So are you saying, Mina, that the deliberate inscrutability of the Parasite and the Tarasov images, are you saying that those are? Oh no, you're saying that those are clear, clean, legible. Yeah, I mean, I think that basically this clear, clean, legible minimalism that we see, the cartoon, I think I'm not understanding the question. The cartoon in the first image that was about meshchanstvo, about the crap, here, I'll put it in again. The hang on. Are you talking about that image where it's all illegible and then it has to be sort of smashed and then we end up in this perfect clean city?
That seems very reminiscent of Mui.
Yes.
You know, with the old house and the furniture and all the things from the old world and that have to be smashed.
It's all this clutter. It's all this sort of motley randomness that I think, as Mina's suggesting, is not very readable, right? You just it just is a jumble. But then you get deposited in this clean city of the future where you know where you are and you know what direction you're going. And it's all clear, just like in the still from Parasite. I hope that makes sense.
Right. Thanks a lot. Daria, please.
Thank you.
You need to turn on your microphone and I'll
Yours. Is it okay? Yes. Thank you so much for your talk. It was absolutely fascinating. I've learned a lot also, and I have a lot of questions, but I will try to make them short and to the point. I have actually questions and comments. So first of all, you have actually talked about this, but as soon as you've mentioned Gorky's first quote on meshchanstvo in one of your first slides, saying that meshchanstvo was like a swamp, it made me think of a short story by Chekhov of 1886 called Tina.
Which is anti-Semitic. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so this is what I thought to myself even before you talked about the Jews, that it had something in common. And I was thinking of how the terminology might be applicable, might be, analyzed here, this idea of swamp, the mire, from Chekhov to Gorky, since they also corresponded, of course. And so this view of the Jews and the meshchanstvo in parallel. And this brings me to the other Gorky quotes that you showed us. This idea, I think actually there's a lot to be said about it, but to be short, this idea of swamp, of something swampy and impure, as you have said, and also of the disease. So this medical or pseudo-medical discourse that becomes overwhelming in the early Soviet years regarding meshchanstvo, and that culminates in Gorky's speech of 1934. It actually also resonates with something else that Gorky deems as a disease in this same speech. I mean homosexuality, because he also says in this same speech, which is actually kind of weird because it's a speech about literature, but he makes this parallel. He establishes this parallel at the end of his speech between fascism and homosexuality. And also, as you have shown, so stigmatizes meshchanstvo as being the disease, impure, etc., etc. And so I was thinking of how all of this would this be pertinent to mix it all up together? And then Olga Mayorova has reminded of Kuzmin. So maybe this is one of the ways of working it in, of showing how all of this, all of which seems to Russian intellectuals of this time, leftist intellectuals, of course, as being unorthodox, in the middle, because homosexuals were also regarded as being in the middle, this люди лунного света, according to Rozanov. So of being not of not having a pure definition, and everything is deemed as meshchanstvo, as impure, and also, which is weird, decadent, as opposed to something healthy, Soviet, young, robust, etc. So in a weird way, decadence meets meshchanstvo and vice versa in this Soviet early Soviet discourse. And this also led me to remember one of my favorite movies of the 1920s. I'm sure you know it, which is called Третья Мещанская by Abram Rom. It is and which depicts, if not everybody knows it, it depicts a life of a couple, which becomes in which the woman soon becomes the wife of the best friend of her husband, and then leaves both of the men because they live all together after getting an abortion. So this Третья Мещанская, it's a caricature of Meshchanskoe счастье, but it is also a wonderful movie for the object, for the material aspect, because you said that you were interested in the material aspect. So this is their apartment, the way it is depicted, it is like a small museum of meshchanstvo, and it is not all sarcastic the way Abram Rom depicts it.
Yeah.
It's a very it's kind of an idyllic space within this Soviet space, which is not shown actually, but of which we only see the feet of the people because it is below ground. I think I will end here. I just have two other small comments. I have one question. Why do you think Herzen described those poor meshchanie who were so happy in their mediocrity, drinking tea and also eating meat every day? Because eating meat is it doesn't really seem as being something moderate to do. And to me, it reminded me of ironic or sarcastic portraits that one can find in Russian literature of English people who eat meat every day. But do you have something to say about this? And my last idea was to also see how meshchanstvo was mocked in Russian poetry of the first modernism. So, for instance, if one, because except Kuzmin, the mainstream is to mock meshchanstvo, so it's to mock meshchanie, and to depict them or depict it as this cultural phenomenon as the public who doesn't understand what real poetry is.
Yeah.
For instance, in Bloch's Художник of 1913, в дни ваших свадеб, etc., похорон. So this is, I think, I'm wondering if this isn't one of the ways of how meshchanstvo, through this poetic discourse, becomes a synonym of черня. Because the opposition in Bloch's Художник is between the poet, who is like this free bird, and who is put into a cage by those who cannot rightfully listen to him because they don't understand.
Yeah.
And this is the parallel that he gets from Pushkin's Поэты черни. So meshchanstvo becomes not only this unknowing class, it's even worse. It's this audience that cannot commune with the poet because it cannot become the собеседник. It cannot become the one who listens and who can react. And speaking of собеседник, of course, one can also think about Mandelstam's childhood memories in Шум времени and his own depiction of this meshchansky byt.
Yeah, which is Jewish also.
Which is Jewish, absolutely,
Yeah.
and which he describes as being Jewish and meshchansky and petits bourgeois. Yes.
Thank you very much. Incredibly helpful, very rich comments.
Thank you, Daria.
Yeah, I might actually ask you, because I'm
We
writing.
can't hear you. Oh,
Sorry. I might actually ask you to write me an email if you don't mind with some of those comments because I was writing quickly. That would be really useful. Just one thing about the swamp image. The swamp image is everywhere and it's fascinating. It's in Chernyshevsky and What Is to Be Done. He talks about draining the swamp, right? He talks about draining the swamp, and they're going to have they're going to take these marshes, which are in Ukraine as it happens. They're going to take these marshes and they're going to drain them and they're going to make them productive and straight and nice, which is what, like in the US, the Army Corps of Engineers did in Florida, right? You bring kind of order to this messy swamp, right? Where it's seen as unproductive. And I've sometimes wondered where this drain the swamp came from. Mussolini says it, it's common. I wouldn't be surprised if it came back to the English occupation of Ireland in the 17th century. That's my guess, right?
But,
Draining swamps.
I'm sorry, but in Russian context, doesn't it also draw on St. Petersburg Foundation?
For sure.
On
For
the
sure.
drained
Yeah,
swamp?
drain all of that, Yeah, so anyway, there's that. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, I'll look at it again. I don't think there were any other questions that you asked, but this was very useful. Thank you very much.
The meat question. Why do they eat meat?
I think it's because in that passage, the implication is that they're eating a little bit of meat. You know, it's like a little bit of meat, a little tea, a little everything. It didn't seem like John Bull, the Englishman, sitting there and eating roast beef in huge quantities. At least that's how I read it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. So we have a few questions from our students. Please, Maya was the first to raise her hand.
Yes, thank you so much for your talk. I found it really fascinating because I've never thought of meshchanstvo as a cultural concept like that. And I have a question referring to what you said about Herzen, when he said that that you said that meshchanstvo was an opposition, according to him, was an opposition to Russianness. And I wanted to ask you if do you think that the negative perception of meshchanstvo was a result of their lifestyle, their traits, but also to some extent to their origins. Like you mentioned that a lot of people, a lot of meshchanie were, I don't know, Armenian or another origins that they were not Russian. So to what extent was it this negativity came from their lifestyle, and to what extent it came from their origins, that they were not Russians?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I actually don't think that the hostility stems from originally the meshchanstvo being seen as foreign, because that I think what happened more was that the meshchanstvo kind of became available as a category where you could stick a bunch of negative content into this category. And not, not so much at the beginning of the 19th century, but later, part of the negative content comes to be this foreignness, right? I really don't think that all of these negative ideas around meshchanstvo have much to do at all with the reality of the people who occupied the category or how they lived, right? Except to the extent that it was a very motley group, right? It was illegible, as Mina was saying, from the outside. It was unpredictable, kind of mobile, very dependent. So I don't think it really had much to do with the specific way that they were living or even who they were. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
certainly, these meanings attached to it, and there's definitely anti-Semitism there, and there's, negative feelings towards non-Russians, but I don't think that's why the category was stigmatized originally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. I have a very small follow-up question before I will hand out the mic to Margot. It's connected with what Maya just asked you about. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk that meshchanstvo came from miasto, from the Polish word. And when you said that at some point Herzen started thinking about the un-Russian character of meshchanstvo, I was wondering whether he started reflecting about the fact that the word itself had a foreign origin.
Yeah, I mean, I've wondered, and I've also wondered where Polishness is going to come in to the sort of not Russianness of it. I haven't seen it yet because I think Poles were coded as bad in a different way, right, in the second half of the 19th century. So I'm not sure. So far, I have not really seen that. Yeah, and Ukrainian miesta too. I mean, it's a Slavic root, so and I haven't in the various kinds of badness that attached to meshchanstvo, I've not yet seen Polishness. I think they had other categories of bad for Poles and for Ukrainians too.
Okay, thanks. Margot,
Thanks.
please.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for a great presentation you did, and very interesting. It's for me and for my collaboration students. Like, my question is that what do you think if Herzen lived today? Who would he consider the modern petit bourgeois?
Oh, that's a very good question. And the modern petit bourgeois, and you mean also the modern meshchanin, same, if we're taking them to mean the same thing? Well, one thing I've been thinking about is that it's easy for me to defend and take pleasure in foreign versions, non-American versions of the petit bourgeois and the meshchansky. But when I look at things that are too close to me, when I look at forms of meshchanstvo that are very close to me culturally, that's when I feel this revulsion, right? That's when I think, oh, I cannot look at this. This is stupid. This is ugly. This is all these ideas, all these words we have, constantly evolving words that we have for making fun of things that sort of young Americans would now call basic, or basically all these sort of banal, repetitious cultural forms that I might see in a, quote, suburban or middle class house. If they're too close to me, I will recoil, right? If they're in 1870 in Russia, or even in 1920 in the Soviet Union, I'll be fascinated, right? So I think, and this is part of what Bourdieu writes about, it's the cultural forms that are close to you that are threatening. Does that make sense? I mean, I could give you millions of examples of American meshchanstvo, so many, right? So many. But about a year ago, I was walking in New York in my neighborhood, and I stumbled on a sidewalk sale, people just selling their belongings, and it was a huge quantity of sovietsky farfor, which an old Soviet, probably Ukrainian person in New York was getting rid of and didn't want. And I bought all of it for $150. I bought a massive quantity of farfor, and then I've been giving it away. And everybody who sees it says, oh, that was in my babushka's house, right? So, and it has such different meaning. To me, it was exotic. To them, it was their babushka. To some people, it was like meshchanstvo. They didn't like it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lucille.
Hello. First, thank you for your presentation. Really interesting. And my question is, you presented Herzen's essays and letters mostly. Do you think we could find any other elements about meshchanstvo in his fiction, maybe?
I need to go back and look at Kutoinavat, and I haven't done that yet. I'm not sure. I mean, in my memory, there's I guess it is a sort of banal, enclosed life that's getting represented in that text, but I need to go back and look and see if it's, and that will be really interesting. If in fact in Kutoinavat there is some kind of indictment of something like meshchanstvo, that will be important because it will predate, it'll be, before he was in Europe. Because I really see his encounter with France and England and the failures of the 1848 revolutions. I think that's where I'm kind of seeing this preoccupation, but it may be that it predates that. Thank you. I need to do that.
Thank you, Lucille. Margot, please.
All right. So thank you so much for your presentation. That was very interesting. I have a question about the way you described the way that Meshchanins were living and who they were and everything around that. Do you believe that in the way that a Meshchanin was described, if it could possibly evoke perfection or an ideal of a way of living in a way that you said they were isolated from the world, that they were enjoying simple things, you said domestic life, everything that could be possibly, enjoyed nowadays and maybe even at Herzen's times, maybe?
It's a really good question because the answer should be yes, right? For the reasons that you just said. I mean, Pomilovsky's Meshchanskie счастье looks pretty good to me. But the fact is it wasn't, right? It was not used in that way, which is interesting. Instead, there's this focus on sort of fragmentation, mottliness, a sort of thick and meaningless material culture. And so that is interesting. That maybe there were other words that were used to evoke that version of perfection, that you're talking about. Peasants certainly could be used to evoke that.
All
Does
right,
that
thank you.
make sense? Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Irina, пожалуйста.
Excuse me, I have difficulty to speak in English. We speak to meshchanство in political cadre with Lenin. And my question is, what do you think to his image to meshchanство in literature in reflected to political idea with Lenin and no less.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing or understanding the question. Maybe.
Irina, why don't you ask it in Russian?
Да, пожалуйста.
Да, могу.
Только медленно.
Давайте.
Вы говорили, что это мещанство, оно в литературе было использовано тоже Лениным. И возможно было, что эта картинка была использована тоже в кадре политики, которая могла тоже же, это нехорошая картинка, и возможно ли, что она как-то подействовала с литературой на политику, как вы говорили в Советском Союзе, с революцией и таким.
Про мещанство Ленина?
Да, когда он говорил, и эта картинка могла бы использоваться в другом контексте, но
Понятно,
чтобы
спасибо.
ему помочь,
Я отвечу.
тяжело было объяснить.
Okay. The short answer is I don't know, right? I don't know enough about these ideas and how they were spread. But I certainly would expect that this would influence the way that meshchanstvo was perceived. So thank you, because I definitely need to look at that. But the short answer is I just don't know. Sorry.
Fair enough. Thank you. Tanya, пожалуйста.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I was a bit surprised that you didn't mention Mikhail Pagodin. He seems to have been the first among Russian authors to begin the stigmatization of the meshchanство as early as the late 1820s. There's corporate website, I don't know, I think.
There's what?
Shows his Невеста на ярмарке, where he wrote that only the meshchane eat kidneys and sauce. But of course, Herzen, I agree with you, but of course, Herzen used much stronger expressions and wrote more about the meshchanство. But in this connection, while listening to your talk, I was thinking that stigmatization didn't always exist. We know the meshchanstvo already in Peter's time, but stigmatization rose more than a century later. It's interesting to consider how far this stigmatization was connected to the deterioration in the quality of life of the meshchanstvo. For instance, I would not go so far as to say that France was to blame for the stigmatization of the meshchanstvo.
No, I'm talking about that it's not to blame for the stigmatization, but that that's when it joins up with the petits bourgeois, right? With the French term petit bourgeois.
Oh, no, I'm not about it. Sorry, I'm about other point. I can share other point that the Napoleonic Wars did provoke a serious economic crisis. And the prices rose sharply in the 1820s. More importantly, the salaries of the urban strata, such as professor, for example, whom I have studied, were depreciating, and the well-being of the meshchanstvo depended directly on their expenditures, because that's not directly, but it was exist. And what, in your opinion, triggered the process of stigmatization?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question, and thank you for this because I did not look at Pogodian, and I guess that because I've been looking at the period where the stigmatization a little bit later, the later period where the stigmatization has already begun, and it is so clearly not attached to economic realities and has to do with something else altogether. I haven't thought as much about this pre-Herzen earlier period when, as you're saying, it sounds like it really did have to do with a decline in living standards or precarity. My guess, I don't know these texts, so I can't say for sure, but my guess would be that it's precisely the precarity of these people, right, that makes them available for stigmatization, right? They are threatening, they are worrisome precisely because their situation is precarious, right? Like gig workers. Who knows what they're going to do? Where are they from? Who are they? What laws apply to them? I would imagine that the stigmatization comes from that. And their precarity would be intensified as you're explaining in these periods of economic crisis. So that's very useful to me I don't know about in Pogodian, but at least in this economic crisis of the 1820s, it's very useful to know that maybe they really were in trouble economically. And then in effect, they're blamed for that trouble, right? Then they become, they're bad for that. So thank you, that's very useful.
Thank you. Спасибо, Tatiana. Thanks a lot. Any more questions? I have a few questions, but I wouldn't like to monopolize.
Can I just say one thing to Tatiana?
Sure,
Tatiana,
absolutely.
I would love to actually ask you some more questions about that, if it's okay if I email you, or can you tell me your last name?
For me, Tatiana Kostina.
Kostina. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I can send you Tatiana's email address if you want that.
Thank you, if you don't mind. Thanks, because that's new for me. Thank you.
I had a follow-up question for this.
Okay, so all right. No, Daria has a follow-up question, so if you don't make it too long, I'll have time to ask my questions. There you go.
Thank you. I had it made me think what Tatiana you have just said. I wanted also to ask you how you go in Russian culture, let's say it like this, from Delvik's poem of 1818 called Моя хижина, in which he chants the blissfulness of having how do you say it in English, a vegetable garden to what Herzen describes and criticizes less than 20 years later.
Yeah.
So this is my question to you both, actually.
That's a really good question, and maybe Tatiana would answer it differently, but and I don't know the poem, but
It's wonderful.
is not knowing the poem, my guess would be that your little ogorod or your little kitchen garden would likely align you more with the peasant in some sense than with the meshchanin.
Well, in Delvik's case, it's not really the peasantry, it's the idea of being away from the aristocratic world and from being
So it's
away.
kind of a dacha vibe.
Well, kind of.
Well, it's also connected with sentimentalism.
Of course,
Yeah.
it's the small space, the in between
Right,
space,
right.
being away from Mishchanov, etc. But this
Yeah.
is my question: how you go from
Right,
here?
how that transition happens. Now, that's a very interesting question. And again, I haven't really thought about the period.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
Don't you think that? Oh, sorry, there's something wrong.
This is
Can you-
me.
Yep. Don't you think that it all has to do with the fact that Herzen was an emigre? You know, I mean, this neglect for people longing for, homish happiness might actually have a lot to do with someone who doesn't have a home, and he cannot have a home because he's living in political exile. One way to, reconcile with that idea is to scorn the people who showcase attachment to this kind of value and to this kind of, longing for a home.
I think it's possible. It's also, his wife ran off with his best friend. And before in Bolo and Duma, I guess there's actually quite a positive view of family happiness, right? And as Polina says, he was not happy at his family home, his father's home. But I think that there's something to be said for the possibility that his own life pushed him toward rejecting those versions of happiness, which actually he had in his early years of his marriage. I think he had been fairly content in that way. But it's this really interesting question that Daria asked about how does that happen, relatively quickly? The decline of sentimentalism, for sure, right? It's not going to mean the same thing to retreat to your little garden. That little garden, that retreat, that dacha life, whatever, the meaning of it somehow changes. And I think it would be important to look at that. Another text from that period that I think is important is Gogol's Starosvetskiy pomeshchiki, because what the hell are these people? They're supposed to be pomeshchiki, but they seem kind of like mishanya, really, or there's something. They don't seem like mishanya. I mean, they have an estate and they're living on the land, but they have this super thick material culture, right? That sort of crowds out everything spiritual. So that's another one of those possibly transitional texts. Sorry, Rodolphe, you were going to say something.
No, I'm agreeing with you and getting ready to ask my questions.
Yeah.
All right. So, if I may, thank you very much for that very interesting talk. And I have a few questions. The first one is connected with context and connected with inserting this whole story into a wider European context, which you did, and specifically into the wider context of visual culture. Because what really strikes me is how visual, Herzen's representations of what meshchanstvo is and of what meshchanskoye счастье is.
Yes.
And he tries somehow to connect that, with political terms attached to French reality, and including to French political reality and to French social reality, with referring to petits bourgeois and whatnot. But what really strikes me is the depictions it gives about, what he considers the meshchanская жизнь are more seem to me not to have anything to do with French reality and to be more connected with images from German Biedermeier sculpture. I mean, the idea that the meshchanское счастье is to have your individual house, domik. The word domik is there in several quotes that you gave. That seems to me, and you did mention Spitzberg, that really seems to come from a Biedermeier painting much more than from the urban reality that Herzen could witness in London and especially in Paris. So I was wondering about that, and especially since, and this takes us back to meat, I believe that some Russian writers build their political and social representations about Europe, about the Western world, not only basing themselves on written sources, but also on visual sources. And it's pretty obvious in the case of Karamzin and, in connection with what it says about the English. And you mentioned John Bull, and Karamzin obviously knew the caricatures by Gilray about what, English happiness is and how it is connected with the conception of meat. So I was wondering whether you could say a few things about what you know about his visual sources. So that's one question. And my other question, and it also has to do with broadening the context, is how he used and how all these writers that you mentioned, whom you discussed today, used this category to actually create some dialogue with other Russian texts. When you mentioned Meshchanskoe счастье from 1860 or 1861, I could not, not think about Семейное счастье by Tolstoy, which, was written in 1859. So how is it? How can this be framed as a kind of answer to what Tolstoy's fantasies about what aristocratic happiness is? And I was really puzzled with the end quote from Molotov, "Эх, господа, что-то скучно." That seems very Gogolesque, of course. I mean,
Yes, it's like Koryaska. It's basically the last line of Koryaska.
It's like скучно на этом свете, господа. So this seems to, and then you mentioned, of course, the старосветские помещики, and I was wondering whether you could elaborate on how this staging of Mishan, in Herzen and in Pomilovsky, is a way to create some kind of dialogue with other Russian or Ukrainian or Russian-speaking Ukrainian texts.
I hadn't thought about that. I was thinking more about the European context, English, French, German, and not so much about how this fits into this particular kind of intertextuality in the Russian case. But certainly, I mean, as you say, you can't think about the material culture of the home without thinking about Tolstoy and without calling it up, right? So I think that there are probably plenty of places where you could point to this kind of these texts talking to each other. And it could be from, relatively positive examples to in later Tolstoy in Resurrection, Воскресенье, there's this incredibly negative representation of material culture, which is, theoretically kind of an aristocrat's home, but it's just every single object seems to be, it's all this like beautiful kind of bourgeois comforts. Every single one of them seems to be made out of the congealed suffering of less fortunate people, right? So I think that's another thing that gets called up. I mean, I think that one way to imagine this text, the Herzen, would be that these kind of like antenna shoot out from it and connect with other texts, but I'm not sure to what extent it's deliberate, but it's definitely happening. The question about the visual culture is really good. And I think that, like in that first in the Aileen Kelly quote that I had on the first slide, I think Herzen's, when he is expressing his revulsion toward a certain view of meshchanstvo, that it's too tidy, it's too nice, it's too clean, it's too centered on a certain narrow idea of comfort. That definitely seems to be his image of the German, a German view of culture. And in this, he has this, there are passages where it's almost like reading Dostoevsky's Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, where Dostoevsky's so upset with the Germans for being clean, and orderly. I think there are moments, there are definitely moments like that in Herzen, but the visual culture will be another thing to explore. I'm really at the very beginning of this, and I'm super grateful to everybody for all these comments, because this could go a lot of different ways, this project. I mean, it could go backward, like with Tatiana Kostina's comments, I could look back and try to see how the early phases of how this stigma formed, or I could certainly look ahead. I'm kind of dreading reading a lot of Gorky, but I think I might have to. But I'm very open to suggestions about what to read. The Kuzmin, that's very helpful. Pagodin, all very useful. Because it hasn't really, I don't think this has really been written about that much. There's a book by the a Finnish scholar, Verlainen, I think, which is about Soviet meshchanstvo ideas, and the meshchania as sort of an internal enemy. And there's a really strange and wonderful book by someone named Vera Dunham, an emigre scholar in the US, who in the 60s or 70s wrote about meshchanstvo as well. But that's really all I know as far as the scholarship. If anybody knows more, I would be grateful.
Right. Okay. So I don't think we have any more questions. So
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. We really appreciate it too. So thanks for accepting to give a talk at our seminar. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Yes, Daria? Daria has the last question, maybe?
No, I'm sorry, but this is a fascinating topic. But I just I will write to you if you don't mind.
Okay, no, let's write.
But in the Soviet context, there are a lot more things that can be questioned. For instance, two things. One, why there were streets named Первая Мещанская, for instance.
Yeah.
If this is so bad of being Meshchanian. And also Trotsky, in one of his late works called Gorky, a Meshchanian in literature.
Right, and you really don't want to be called Meshchanian, right?
This is my
it's still a good insult. It's still a good insult, right? Like you wouldn't want someone to call you that, right?
No.
Right.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Anne.
so much.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everybody. Take care.